The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world that paper is money. Look at the cash in your wallet. Look at the digits in your bank account right now. You think that is wealth. You think that is yours. You think that because you worked for it, sacrificed for it, and saved it, that it holds permanent value. History says you are wrong. In the last 500 years, 6 global empires have collapsed, from the silver mines of the Spanish Empire to the trade routes of the Dutch, and finally to the banking halls of the British. The mortality rate of fiat currency is exactly 100%. Not 99, 100. They did not die of old age or bad luck. They were murdered. They were destroyed by a specific repeating mechanism that favors the elites while liquidating the savings of the working class. There is a technical name for this theft that they do not teach you in school. It is called the Cantillon Effect. Discovered by an Irish-French economist in the 18th century, it explains that money is not neutral. When the government prints new money, it does not distribute it magically into everyone's pocket at the same time. No, it goes to the insiders first. The big banks, the defense contractors, the corporations close to the political power center. They get the new money while it still has its full purchasing power. They use it to buy hard assets, stocks, and real estate, driving up prices. By the time that money trickles down to you in the form of wages, prices have already risen. The insiders get richer precisely because you get poorer. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is the mechanics of central banking. It is a wealth transfer engine masquerading as monetary policy. And on February 28, 2022, the United States did not just sanction Russia. We pulled the trigger on ourselves. We just entered phase 5 of the currency death cycle. This is the phase where the exorbitant privilege becomes the ultimate trait. Your savings are being diluted by a rate of inflation that the government deliberately underreports, using hedonic adjustments and substitution metrics to mask the pain. Your purchasing power is being stolen not by a thief in the night, but by the very policies designed to save the system. And the scary part is that it is mathematically impossible to reverse it. Wall Street calls it a soft landing. The Federal Reserve calls it correction. I call it a crime scene. If you want to know why your grocery bill is up 30% while they tell you inflation is cooling, if you want to know who is really holding the $35 trillion of debt, and if you want to be one of the few who survives phase 6, then you need to see the evidence I am about to show you. To understand the murder of the dollar, we must first look at the graveyard of its ancestors. This is not the first time this has happened, and the similarities are terrifying. In the history of global commerce, 6 distinct currencies have held the title of global reserve over the last 500 years. It began with Portugal in 1515, then Spain in 1530, who discovered massive silver deposits in the Americas. They thought they were rich, but instead of investing in production, they simply minted more coins. The abundance of money without an abundance of goods led to hyperinflation that brought the empire to its knees. Then came the Netherlands in 1640, the masters of trade who invented the stock market. They fell victim to speculative bubbles, most notably the tulip mania, where the price of a single flower bulb exceeded the price of a house, proving that when money is easy, sanity evaporates. France took the crown in 1720, only to destroy the livre through the disastrous Mississippi Company scheme. A man named John Law convinced the French regent to print paper money backed by the theoretical wealth of Louisiana. It was a hallucination. When the public realized the wealth did not exist, the currency went to zero, and the streets of Paris ran with blood. And finally, Great Britain in 1815. Do you see the pattern? None of them lasted. The average tenure of dominance is roughly 94 years. The US dollar has been the official global anchor since 1944. That makes our system 81 years old. Mathematically, we are statistically overdue for a reset. But why does this happen? Why do the smartest empires in history, with the brightest economists and the strongest armies, always destroy their own money? It is called hubris. It is the arrogance of power. Every empire in history believed their currency would last forever. The Romans believed the denarius was eternal, even as Nero and Commodus diluted the silver content with copper to pay their legions, eventually leaving a coin that was 95% base metal. The Spanish believed their silver was infinite. The British believed the sun would never set on the pound sterling. They all fell into the same trap. They believed they could cheat the laws of economics. They thought this time was different. They thought they could print prosperity. But the mechanism of destruction is always the same. It is a predictable financial pattern that plays out in 7 distinct phases. We have decoded this mechanism. Here's the roadmap of death you need to memorize. Phase 1 is hard money, where trust is built on gold or silver. This is the era of honest trade. Phase 2 is paper claims, where banks issue receipts for the gold to make commerce easier. Trust is high and the economy expands. Phase 3 is debt expansion. This is the turning point. The government begins to print more receipts than gold exists to fund wars or public programs. This is where the crime begins, but the punishment comes later. To understand where we are going in Phase 5, we have to go back to where the British went wrong in Phase 3, because right now the United States is mirroring the exact same mistakes that destroyed the British Empire exactly 1 century ago. Let me take you back to London before the fall. But before we look at the dollar's death, we must look at the dollar's father, British pound. Before 1914, the pound was not just money, it was a religion. It operated in Phase 1, hard money. Every note in circulation was backed by gold in the Bank of England's vault. The exchange rate was sacred. £1 equaled exactly $4.86. This peg was not a suggestion. It was a promise. It represented trust, stability, and the full faith of the world's greatest empire. A merchant in Shanghai or a farmer in Argentina could hold a British pound and know with absolute certainty that it was as good as gold. It felt invincible. But then came the war. And with war came the temptation that destroys every currency. Phase 3. World War I was horrifically expensive, costing roughly $44 billion in today's money. Britain could not pay for it with gold alone. They had a choice: stop the war or cheat the system. They chose to cheat. On September 19, 1914, they made a fatal decision. They quietly suspended the gold standard. The government told the public it was just a temporary emergency measure. They appealed to patriotism. They said it was necessary to defeat the enemy. Remember that word, temporary? It is the most dangerous lie in economics. It is the code word for a permanent loss of freedom. Income tax was temporary. The suspension of gold convertibility was temporary. The fighting stopped in 1918, but the printing presses did not. Britain was drowning in debt, yet they tried to pretend nothing had changed. In 1925, out of pure arrogance and a desperate desire to reclaim their past glory, they tried to restore the gold standard at the old pre-war rate. They wanted to return to Phase 2. They wanted to rebuild trust, but it was too late. The mathematics of empire had already turned against them. They had printed too many paper claims for gold that no longer existed. The money supply had doubled, but the gold reserves had not. The markets knew it, speculators knew it, and in 1931, the dam finally broke. Facing a massive run on their reserves, with foreign nations demanding gold instead of paper, Britain abandoned the gold standard permanently. Overnight, the pound crashed by 30%. Global trust was shattered. The savings of the middle class were vaporized. A lifetime of labor stored in sterling was devalued in the blink of an eye. The era of sterling dominance was over. The crown did not disappear, it just moved across the ocean to the United States. Britain lost its privilege not because of invasion, but because they followed the cycle. Hard money became paper claims became debt, and debt became collapse. Now look at the United States today. Does temporary inflation sound familiar? Does suspending the debt ceiling sound familiar? We are not writing a new story. We are just reading the next chapter of theirs. While Britain was dying, America was setting the trap. July 1944. Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. 730 delegates from 44 allied nations gathered to build a new financial world. But it was not a negotiation, it was a surrender. The United States held 2/3 of the world's gold. We held the food, the fuel, and the weapons. We held all the leverage. The British delegation, led by John Maynard Keynes, tried to propose a neutral global currency called the Bancor, a system fair to all nations. The Americans crushed the idea. We dictated the terms. The dollar would be pegged to gold at $35 an ounce. Every other currency would be pegged to the dollar. If you wanted to trade, you needed dollars. If you wanted value, you trusted America. This created what a furious French minister later called the exorbitant privilege. Think about the scam we pulled off. It was the greatest financial coup in history. It could print paper dollars, created out of thin air, and exchange them for German cars, Japanese electronics, and Saudi oil. The world had to sweat and bleed and manufacture to earn money. We just had to turn on the printer. It seemed like the perfect crime. We exported paper and imported real wealth. But there was a fatal flaw. It is called the Triffin dilemma, predicted in 1959 by economist Robert Triffin. He warned Congress that the system contained a mathematical contradiction. To supply the world with dollars for growing global trade, America must run trade deficits. We must send more money out than we bring in. But the more dollars we print and export, the less each dollar is worth relative to the gold in our vaults. Eventually, the world would realize we printed more paper claims than we had gold to back them. Congress ignored them. They kept printing to fund the Great Society and the Vietnam War, and the trap snapped shut. But before the final collapse of the gold window, there was a secret attempt to rig the market that few people know about. It was called the London Gold Pool. In 1961, the United States and 7 European central banks formed a secret cartel. Their goal was to manipulate the price of gold and keep it suppressed at $35 an ounce to hide the inflation caused by American money printing. They sold tons of their own gold into the open market to absorb the demand. It was market manipulation on a global scale. They thought they could fight the free market. They were wrong. The market absorbed everything they sold and demanded more. By 1968, the London Gold Pool collapsed under the weight of buying pressure. This was the canary in the coal mine. The smart money knew the game was rigged and they wanted out. By the 1960s, the world woke up. They saw the deficit spending. They saw the inflation. France's President Charles de Gaulle called our bluff. He demanded his gold back. He actually sent naval vessels to New York to physically collect gold bars from the Federal Reserve. This was a bank run on the United States. Spain followed. Germany followed. Switzerland followed. Gold was bleeding out of Fort Knox at an alarming rate. We lost 50% of our reserves in just 6 years. America was technically bankrupt. The liabilities exceeded the assets. President Nixon faced a choice: stop printing money and crash the economy, or break the promise and steal the wealth of the world. He chose to break the promise. August 15, 1971. Nixon went on TV and temporarily suspended the gold standard. He told the American people it was to protect the dollar from speculators. That was a lie. It was not protection, it was a default. Overnight, the dollar became 100% fiat, a piece of paper backed by nothing but faith. The temporary suspension has lasted 50 years, and the theft of your wealth had officially begun. Technically, the dollar died in 1971. It lost its backing, it lost its anchor, it should have collapsed right there into hyperinflation. But it did not. Why? Because we pulled off the most brilliant geopolitical maneuver in history. We replaced the intrinsic value of gold with the strategic value of oil. July 1974, Treasury Secretary William Simon boarded a classified flight to Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. His mission was simple: save the dollar or the American empire ends. He offered the House of Saud a deal they could not refuse. The terms were straightforward. The United States would provide total military protection for the kingdom. We would sell them our most advanced weapons. We would guarantee their survival against Israel and their regional rivals. In exchange, Saudi Arabia agreed to price all of its oil exports exclusively in US dollars. Not gold, not yen, not marks, only dollars. Overnight, we replaced the gold standard with the oil standard. We forced the entire world to need our paper just to survive. If a country wanted energy, they needed the dollar. This created the petrodollar recycling loop. And this is the genius part. Japan buys oil from Saudi Arabia. Japan needs dollars to pay for it. Japan sends Toyotas and Sony Walkmans to America to get those dollars. Saudi Arabia receives the dollars from Japan. But Saudi Arabia is a desert kingdom. They cannot spend all that money. So what do? They invest them back into US Treasury bonds. They effectively loan us back the very money we printed to buy their oil. It was the ultimate financial alchemy. We got the oil, we got the goods, and we got the money back to fund our government. But what happened to those who tried to break the system? This is where the story gets dark. In 2000, Saddam Hussein began selling Iraq's oil in euros, bypassing the dollar. He called the dollar a worthless currency. 3 years later, his country was invaded and he was removed. In 2011, Muammar Gaddafi of Libya planned to create a gold-backed currency called the Denier to trade oil across Africa, bypassing the dollar and the euro. Emails from the US State Department, later released to the public, explicitly stated that this gold plan was a threat to the dollar. Shortly after, NATO intervened and Gaddafi was removed. The message to the world was clear. You use our paper, or you face our military. This system allowed America to live beyond its means for 50 years. It allowed us to fund 800 military bases in massive wars without raising taxes. We simply exported our inflation to the rest of the world. As Treasury Secretary John Connolly famously told a group of European diplomats, "The dollar is our currency, but it is your problem." The world paid for the American dream with their sweat and savings, but there was a catch. Phase 4 was powerful, but it was fragile. The gold standard relied on physics and geology. The petrodollar standard relies on geopolitics and fear. It relies on Saudi Arabia needing our protection. It relies on the world fearing our military. But what happens when the fear fades? What happens when the Saudis find a new protector? You do not just lose a currency partner, you lose the foundation of your entire civilization. This brings us to the moment everything changed. The exact moment the US dollar lost its immortality. Happened quietly on February 28, 2022. On that day, the global financial system did not just change, it broke. The United States and the European Union announced the freezing of roughly $300 billion of Russia's central bank reserves. You might support the sanctions. You might agree with the politics. That is irrelevant. In the world of finance, there are no politics, only risk. This action sent a terrifying message to every nation on Earth. The dollar is no longer a neutral store of value. It is a political weapon. If Washington can delete the savings of a G20 nation overnight because of a disagreement, then your money is not safe. If you are China, if you are India, if you are Saudi Arabia, you look at that freeze and you realize that your national savings are essentially held hostage. And this was the trigger for Phase 5. Trust cracked. And when trust cracks, the smart money starts looking for the exit. We are seeing a historic shift called de-dollarization. It is not happening on the news. They will not tell you this on CNN or Fox. It is happening in the vaults. In 2022 alone, global central banks purchased 1,136 metric tons of gold. That is the highest level of gold buying in 55 years. Who is buying? China is buying. Poland is buying. Singapore is buying. Turkey is buying. Even traditional allies are diversifying. Why are they trading their dollars for metal? Because gold cannot be frozen. Gold cannot be sanctioned. Gold has no counterparty risk. Gold has no required permission from the Federal Reserve to exist. They are building a fire exit because they see the smoke. They are preparing for a world where the dollar is no longer the only option. But the modern acceleration of this demise began earlier. In 2008, this was the first heart attack of the system. The global financial crisis should have wiped out the bad debt and the reckless banks. That is how capitalism works. Failure is the cleansing fire. But the Federal Reserve refused to let the fire burn. Instead, they invented quantitative easing. They printed trillions to buy toxic assets from the very banks that caused the crisis. They told us it was a one-time emergency measure. Does that sound familiar? Just like the British in 1914. But emergency measures have a habit of becoming permanent addictions. For the last 15 years, we have lived in an artificial reality where interest rates were held near zero, punishing savers to bail out speculators. This created the everything bubble. Stocks, bonds, real estate, crypto. Everything went up not because the economy was productive, but because the currency was being debased. We pulled demand forward from the future to pretend we were prosperous today. But the future has finally arrived and the bill is due, and the cracks widened during the repo market crisis of September 2019. This was the true cardiac arrest of the financial system. Overnight lending rates between banks spiked to 10%. The plumbing of the financial system seized up because there was too much debt and not enough cash. The Federal Reserve had to step in and print hundreds of billions of dollars overnight to save the system. This was months before the pandemic. They told you the printing was for the virus. That was a convenient cover. The truth is, the system was already broken. They have been keeping it alive on life support ever since. Meanwhile, the mathematics of our debt has become terminal. The U.S. national debt has crossed $35 trillion. That number is so large it loses meaning. But let me give you a metric that should scare you. In 2024, the cost to simply pay the interest on our debt crossed $1 trillion annually. That is more than our entire defense budget. That is more than Medicare. We are now borrowing money just to pay the interest on the money we already borrowed. That is the definition of a Ponzi scheme. We are trapped. We cannot raise taxes enough to fix it. That would crush the economy. We cannot cut spending without causing a political revolt. And we cannot print our way out without triggering hyperinflation. This is the death spiral. This is Phase 5 manifesting in real time. So what comes next? What is Phase 6 and 7? Economist Ludwig von Mises called this the crack-up boom. It is the moment when the public realizes that inflation is not temporary, but the deliberate policy of the state. When this psychological shift happens, the demand for money collapses. People rush to exchange their paper for anything tangible. Washing machines, jewelry, cars, anything that holds value better than the melting ice cube in their pocket. This causes velocity to spike, which sends inflation into the stratosphere. We are seeing the early signs of this psychology right now. Why is the stock market at all-time highs while the manufacturing economy is in recession? Because the market is not pricing in growth. It is pricing in the devaluation of the dollar. It is a flight from currency, disguised as a bull market. The government knows the debt is unpayable. They know the current fiat system is reaching its mathematical end. They will not just let it collapse into chaos. They will attempt a reset. And this is the most dangerous part of the cycle. They are already preparing the infrastructure for central bank digital currencies, or mobile DCs. Unlike cash, which is anonymous and gives you freedom, a CBDC is programmable money. It is the direct liability of the Federal Reserve. They can dictate where you spend it, when you spend it, and if you can spend it. This is not just a new currency, it is a digital prison. It allows them to enforce negative interest rates, forcing you to spend your savings or lose them. It allows them to bypass the banking system and control the population directly. This is their solution to the debt trap. Inflate away the debt while controlling the velocity of money through digital enforcement. So what is the verdict? Do not wait for a Hollywood crash. Do not wait for the screens to go black. Empires do not explode. They rot. The British Empire is still here. London is still standing. But the pound in your pocket has lost 99% of its purchasing power since 1914. A family that kept their wealth in British canoles saw their fortune evaporate in real terms. Your life just gets harder. Your savings just buy less. That is the reality of Phase 5. It is the slow, grinding theft of your labor. But remember this, currency death does not destroy wealth. It transfers it. Energy is neither created nor destroyed. Wealth operates the same way. It transfers wealth from the people who hold paper promises to the people who hold real assets. From those who trust the government to those who trust gold, land, and math. From the passive observer to the active investor. There will be winners in this transition. The only question is whether you will be one of them. History does not repeat, but it rhymes. We are living through the final measures of a song that has played for 80 years. The music is slowing down. The geopolitical alliances are shifting. The debt bomb is ticking. And when the music stops and the chair is pulled, ask yourself, what are you actually holding in your hand? Is it a promise from a bankrupt government? Or is it something real,